Did you know that before Kovu was ever born, there was a good chance that Nuka was the next in line to take over as king after Scar? But when push came to shove, everyone, mainly Scar, decided that the crown should fall onto the shoulders of Kovu, the main protagonist of The Lion King 2, Simba's Pride. Beyond that, though, fans learned throughout the movie that Scar and many of the other lions that became known as the Outlanders had neglected Nuka and continued to neglect him all the way up to his death in the film. And for a while, it just felt like that was sort of Nuka's role in the movie. Looking back on it, there may have been an actual reason that Nuka was treated in such a horrible way. Be warned. It's messed up. In The Lion King 2, it didn't take long for Disney to show fans that Scar had a successor chosen for his throne, but it wasn't Nuka like you may have expected, considering he was the eldest male member of the Outlanders. Scar and Nuka's mother Zira decided that the lioness's next-born son would be the true heir, and apparently they did this almost immediately after Kovu was born. According to Zira, Scar saw himself in Kovu and demanded that he become the successor to the crown. In fact, his demand was so well known that all of the lionesses that stood by Scar even after his death all felt that Kovu was the rightful heir of the Pride Lands. They didn't accept Simba as their leader even though he was the true son of Mufasa, their former king. And as great as that was for Kovu, that probably made Nuka, the elder male of the Outlanders, feel like discarded trash. He knew that he should have been next in line for the throne, but now his much younger brother was named the heir. Whether you like Nuka or not, you have to know how disturbing that is. But why was Nuka passed over so easily as the next leader of the Pride Lands? When it came down to it, Nuka seemed like he was an outcast even among the Outlanders, and this was mainly because of his outward appearance and the way he acted toward everyone in their group. Nuka was shown to be an extremely mangy-looking lion, and he himself noted that he was infested with termites. However, that could be due to his living conditions inside of a massive termite mound. Because of the infestation on top of other possible reasons, Nuka was always scratching and appeared to be shaking almost constantly while he was on screen. All in all, he looked like a very unhealthy lion, and you'll know that in most pack situations, when an animal gets sick or appears unwell, the rest of the members will keep their distance for the sake of their own survival. So, just by looking at him, you can see why the other lions would do their best not to interact with Nuka. On top of that, although he was shown to be clueless and even somewhat neurotic, he still had an annoyingly inflated ego. He held himself in very high regard, even though it seemed like nobody else around him did. That being said, his egotistic attitude could also be a sort of defense mechanism that he built up ever since the Pride started focusing more on Kovu instead of him. Either way, Nuka's sickly appearance and inferior personality likely made him very hard to be around, even for the Outlanders, and that most likely included Scar while he was alive and ruling over Pride Rock. But could there have been more to it than Nuka's outward mangy appearance? Well, this is where a rather popular fan theory from Reddit comes into play that suggests that Nuka was born with a mental illness that would have made him an unfit ruler. And if that's true, it's likely something Scar would have taken note of, causing him to look for a new heir, Kovu. You see, according to this Redditor's theory, when Nuka was born, he showed symptoms of neurosis of the brain. When broken down to its simplest definition, neurosis of the brain results in constant tremors or twitches all over the body. And after looking at how Nuka acted throughout The Lion King 2, it's not hard to see where the Redditor got this idea from. As mentioned, Nuka was always scratching because of his termite infestation and almost always seemed to shake uncontrollably. Needless to say, if some sort of neurosis caused that, then Scar would have known that for the good of the Pride, Nuka could not become its leader. Not only was he not strong enough to lead them physically, but he wasn't strong enough mentally either. Therefore, Scar had to look past Nuka in order to find an heir, which was when he set his sights on Zira's newest son, Kovu, a lion who appeared much more mentally capable and in better physical condition than Nuka. Now, you might be confused and wondering, why would Disney write a dark storyline about cute singing lions? Well, that's because the creators of The Lion King studied how actual lions behaved in the wild and how the Pride hierarchy worked amongst them. In other words, they kept Nuka's story pretty realistic, at least by most standards. Unlike a lot of predatory animals, when a lion is sick, injured, or has some other disability, they aren't immediately cast out of their circle. Instead, they're still respected enough to be fed and kept alive, at least to an extent. You see, according to reports, when a lion is ill or injured, there are basically two variables that come into play that determine whether or not the Pride will stay stay with it or leave it behind. The first is whether or not the lion in question has the ability to keep up with the pride should they be forced to move. For the most part, if the lion or lioness can keep up with the pride, it won't be left behind. And as you saw in The Lion King 2, despite his shaky tendencies, Nuka had no problem moving around like the other Outlanders did, so at the very least, he wouldn't have been kicked out of the pride. On top of that, Nuka was also a member of the dominant lioness's family, which brings me to the second variable. Is the injured or sick lion related to another member of the pride? If it is, then the lions will remain even more respectful of the sick member, even if he or she is slowing them down or unable to hunt. In some cases, it's even been documented that an elder lioness who has lost all of her teeth and was unable to hunt was still being brought food by her daughters and granddaughters. This shows that lions have respect for one another no matter what physical condition they're in. That said, they would never let an injured or unfit lion become the leader of their pride. It just wouldn't happen, and even if it did, another more fit male lion would quickly come along and assert his dominance by killing the current leader. And that's why Scar had to pass over Nuka as the new king of the Pride Lands. He knew that the lion was unfit mentally, and the only way to ensure that another lion didn't come along and kill Nuka was to essentially ignore him. They took care of Nuka enough to make sure that he grew into the teenage lion that Disney introduced him as, but there was no actual nurturing on his part. And odds are that's how it would have gone down in the wild. Nuka would have been raised by a pride, but once he matured, he would never have a chance of becoming a leader. But thinking about Nuka, I can't help but wonder, why didn't Scar sympathize with the young lion more? Even though Scar wasn't nearly as shaky as Nuka was, you can't deny the similarities between the two lions. So you would think that Scar would have seen himself in Nuka a little bit and maybe chose to treat him a little better, or at least hold him in a higher regard than fans saw. When it comes to their physical appearance, both of the lions had smaller frames compared to other males like Mufasa, Simba, or Kovu. On top of that, their manes seemed to grow much less full than other lions, which is usually indicative of a nutritional deficiency. In other words, they weren't eating as well as the other male lions in the pride, so it would have been only natural for Scar to see himself in a young Nuka and wish for him to be nurtured and taken better care of. But that wasn't the case. According to The Lion King 2, Scar fully intended to pass on his title as king to Kovu, a much younger lion than Nuka. But even if you weren't looking at the physical traits, Scar and Nuka's storylines are also very similar. You see, it makes sense to think that before Kovu was born, Nuka was the next in line to be the king. However, as soon as Zira gave birth to the young cub, Scar passed over the elder brother and immediately began focusing on Kovu. Sound familiar? When Mufasa was the king of the Pride Lands, Scar was the next in line and heir to the throne. However, as soon as Simba was born, there was a new cub that was going to be the king. Scar was immediately passed over, so the fact that he would go on and do the same thing to Nuka is truly messed up. And as you know, in the end, Nuka's need to be loved and his yearning for Zira's approval ended up being his downfall. As he chased Simba up a large dam of logs when nobody else would dare follow him, he ended up stepping on a loose tree and falling toward his death. Nuka landed in a grouping of logs only to be crushed by some of the logs that he had loosened during his pursuit. He had one heartfelt goodbye with his mother Zira before finally passing on. Do you think that Nuka's death could have been prevented if he had just gotten some of the attention that he deserved? Be sure to let me know in the comments below.